Good morning on this June 1st, 2025. And I apologize. It's another driving video. But it's just that inspiration always seems to hit me when I'm in my vehicle. I don't know why it is, but I want to capture some thoughts. Lots of new configurations, lots of new inspirations from Aaron Tomlinson's live videos. And this is not really a commentary on any of what he is saying. This is just things that are being stirred up in me that I am trying to understand about myself. So this is really all my musings are. It's me trying to articulate and understand this awareness that I have of myself. And I have kind of a general template that I have identified for myself. It's this awareness, this elusive awareness of our elusive soul. I mean, we don't even know what our soul is, so we may as well call it God, because it's the unconscious power that is constantly creating, constantly defining, and constantly generating experiences and perceptions. And it will work in the background to where we're not even aware of it. That's why it's called the unconscious. And that is really my new term for the activated principle that we call God. Our psyche is the engagement switch, our portal to the superconsciousness that we call God. Anyways, your mileage will vary because you have different imprints on your soul, and I'm just sharing my perception. And I know that I'm speaking through experiences and feelings that put my soul at dis-ease. And whenever I feel something that is incongruent or at dis-ease, I need to make a course correction in my understanding. And recently, one of the topics that triggered this musing again in me is how people use answer to prayer as a validation for God's existence, for God being real, right? So answered prayers have kind of become the litmus test of whether God is real or not, and whether you have a relationship with God or not. And then of course comes the question of what about the people that also have asked, based on asked and you shall receive, that also have asked and did not receive. You see, our mental mind that functions from the awareness of judgment, of good and evil, immediately jumps to conclusions about those people not being spiritual, not being favored by God with an answer to their prayer. And that's where the problem starts, right? Because our mental mind puts everything into a category, everything into a folder. It judges right from wrong, good from evil. And so, because we used the signs of answered prayer as the litmus test for God being real, our mental mind now goes into judgment mode, and we separate from those people who have experienced miracles, who have experienced answered prayers, from those who haven't. Now, a couple of times I have had what you would call answered prayers, but half a dozen times or 2 handfuls of times I haven't received an answer to prayer. So the odds of not receiving are greater in my reality than the ones of receiving. So I find that this gauge, this litmus test of whether God is real, to base it on answered prayers is not reliable enough. Okay? And I am not saying that these supernatural events aren't real. They are real. But guess what? Magicians, the people of the so-called dark side, have the same abilities. So what is the difference in a witch having her incantations answered or a Christian having their prayer answered? What is the difference? Are these answers coming from the same neutral source, which we call God? Are they coming from the same neutral source, with the exception that our mental mind, our cognitive mind, applies judgment and calls one source Satan and the other God, depending on the judgment scale of the yin and yang, the black and white, the good and evil. And so it divides, right? And we suffer in this world because of this divisive mental capacity. We make assumptions and conclusions, as I said, that the person that doesn't have their prayers answered must not be in connection to God. And then we have this whole problem again of our mind fabricating a reality, a Maya, and we personify God. And then God becomes this Santa Claus figure or archetype that rewards the good and punishes the evil. See, clearly duality, clearly the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which leads to death. What I'm saying is, I'm not saying that God isn't real. I'm saying that which our mental mind concocts and fabricates as a conclusion about God is not real. God has to be a neutral force in the universe. God cannot be biased. And that was my problem as a Christian. You know, a couple of times God favored me. Many, many other times God did not favor me. And it tormented my soul because I felt like I had fallen out of favor with God. Okay, that is torment to the soul. And I know many of you have experienced supernatural miracles and signs that made you feel like God was on your side. But I am almost sure that many of you, the same people, have experienced where God did not answer your prayer. How have you reconciled that? How have you reconciled that God did not protect you, or that God did not heal you? How are you reconciling that? What happened to the miraculous? What happened to the connection to God? You see, the illusion that our mind creates by giving God a definition and a certain pattern that upholds our definition for God, that is where we're going to get let down at one point or another. And you just can't pin God down based on your experiences, right? We can't pin God down based on whether my prayer got answered or not, and yours didn't get answered. Beware of the mental mind that draws these conclusions and then goes into judgment mode of people who don't get their prayers answered. That's what I'm questioning. I'm not questioning God. I'm not questioning the God principle. I'm questioning people's conclusions about God and their judgments. And the judgments are cruel. The judgments are ignorant. Why can we not say and admit that, God is a mysterious force, and I don't know why things happen at times and why they don't happen at other times. But I refuse to cast judgment about myself of somehow failing or somehow having fallen out of favor with God. I think that's where we need to stop. And how much psychological reliance and dependence are we exercising unconsciously, to give ourselves a sense of approval, and then at the same time mete out disapproval for people who are different, for people who do not share in the same experiences. I like to hold space for everybody, for every human being's experience or non-experience. I do not like to classify God anymore in a certain way, because I do not like to create division. I like to honor you. Whether you had your prayers answered or not, it doesn't matter. I like to honor you for your authentic soul, for your sovereignty. Whatever you're going through, just because you are a spiritual person, maybe more intuitively connected, that doesn't mean that bad things won't happen to you. It doesn't mean that God may not answer your prayer in the future, but He might leave you hanging in a difficult situation, right? Even the most divine human that ever lived ended up on the cross. And because we can't accept that God could manifest as a failure, as not having your prayer answered, that Jesus was forsaken by God, Because we can't accept that we had to spin it into a heroic story that, oh, he laid down his life and paid for our sins to make this failure, so-called failure, a heroic outcome, rather than to admit that sometimes God will let you down. Sometimes the God principle will not play in your favor. And I think we have to be okay with that. Jesus demonstrated this. He experienced God's favor, and he also experienced God's letdown. And until we accept that for ourselves and for one another, we're always going to be in this elitist, judgmental consciousness, right? Judge not. That is what Jesus said. Judge not, because things are not always the way you surmise with your mental mind. Life is very mysterious, and I love it all, and I love every soul. I love the soul that's spiritual. I love the soul that is not spiritual, because I recognize the universal essence that we all are, which we call God.